All right, I think we can start already. So thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending our meetup number 15 for AI Pilipinas. And for tonight, we're just going to discuss and cover AI in healthcare. And we are glad to have with us different experienced professionals who will be sharing and talking about some of their works and experiences and enlightening us and giving us knowledge towards how we can enable AI in healthcare and how we can actually work together towards helping artificial intelligence systems flourish in the Philippines in the context of the healthcare sector. Before we formally start, I'll just be giving a quick introduction about AI Pilipinas first. So AI Pilipinas, we started way back in 2017. So the main primary goal of the group is to foster collaboration between researchers, academe, developers, industry experts with respect to artificial intelligence, sharing knowledge, sharing insights, and sharing anything that can actually benefit the community itself. So we host different types of workshops, trainings, and invite speakers to help cultivate knowledge in the community itself. So we have around 1,400 plus members now in the Facebook group. So if you're not part of the Facebook group yet, you can just go to visit the link. We're also part of the Meetup group. So we have meetup.com/AI Pilipinas. This is where we announce our events. And as mentioned, so we have been doing events since 2017. So we have been doing workshops. We visited different countries and different cities in the Philippines. And we're also inviting speakers, not only from the Philippines, but also invite speakers from different countries to share their experience and knowledge to us. So we've been doing this workshops and events continuously. So as much as possible, we do meetups every other month. So this is our second meetup for the year, and this is our second meetup for this month, and we're doing everything online. So our last year, we hosted our first hackathon at Google Philippines. So this is where we invite and partner up with NGOs and work with data scientists, AI engineers to solve their problems and challenges. So this was a successful event. And this year, we are continuously doing this effort to help educate the country, help educate developers, and push our goal towards making the Philippines as a resource for artificial intelligence engineers, researchers. So our primary goal is to build and nurture that community. So for community guidelines, we always share these community guidelines. So be nice from one another, be respectful and constructive in giving feedbacks and providing questions, and be collaborative as much as possible, and share knowledge not only here in this conversation that we're going to have tonight, but also bringing those conversation and learning on the Facebook group or on the Meetup pages as well. And we, as mentioned, we encourage participation and collaboration between different industries and different experts in the field itself. So if you also want to be part of our list of speakers, if you would want to share your projects, if you would want to share whatever research that you probably have been doing, we'll be happy to host you as one of our speakers in our events. So just go visit bit.ly/AI Pilipinas -speakers, and we'll review the profile, and we'll probably set a schedule with you guys to speak and share about a topic that you might find relevant and might find helpful for the community itself. So before we formally start, I'll be happy to introduce first our panel. So our main objective for the night is to see holistically gaano ba kabilis or gaano ba kahirap or gaano ba kadali gumawa ng AI softwares, especially sa context ng healthcare. So we invited four experienced professionals to give us like an overview or give us a view as to what are their experience are like, so that if we immerse ourselves in doing AI research or doing AI applications in the context of healthcare, we are prepared and we know what set of actions to take. So our first speaker is an associate professor at Aklan University, State University, Prof. Julie Ann Salido. She is a PhD student in computer science at De La Salle University since 2016. And she is a recipient of CHED K-12 Transition Graduate School Scholarship. As a grantee of the Science and Engineering Government Scholarship Program, sponsored by the CHED, she obtained her Master's in Science Computer Science degree at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. At that time, her research interests focused on bioinformatics, information technology, and applied computer science. She has published research articles on computer graphics, computer vision, life sciences, and bioinformatics in high-impact journals such as IEEE Transactions, ACM, and Elsevier that are Scopus indexed. Her current research is focused on skin cancer and disease detection using clinical and dermoscopic images through deep convolutional neural network, region-based CNN, and semantic segmentation. So our first speaker is Julie Ann Salido. Hi, I'm Julie. Julie, can you hear us? Julie, hello. Probably having a network problem. Our next speaker is Doc Erwin John Carpio. Doc Carpio took up medicine and graduated from the UP College of Medicine. Spent his time at UPPGH where he finished his radiology residency and fellowship training in CT MRI and ultrasound. He is a self-taught programmer who developed RadLens. So you can actually search on Google his project. And it was featured at the recent Google TensorFlow Dev Summit 2020. So if you were able to watch that event, RadLens was presented during the keynote itself. He makes sure that he shares his knowledge to the community through his YouTube channel, Rad Horizon, that talks about AI and radiology. So our speaker, as part of our panel, let's welcome Dr. Erwin John Carpio.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, Erwin.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. So our next speaker is Dr. Patrick Silem. He obtained his medical degree from University of the Philippines College of Medicine and has been in informatics ever since. He worked under UP National Telehealth Center for more than half a decade, where he experienced working with the Western Pacific Office of the World Health Organization, Philippine Health Insurance Corporation, Department of Health, and so on. He took a fellowship in health informatics research in the National Institute of Health in Bethesda, Maryland for 2 years. Let's welcome Doc Patrick. Hi, Doc Patrick.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for inviting me.
For sure, Doc.
Hello.
All right. So our last panel speaker is no other than Attorney Larissa Serso. Lars is a senior associate at the CNE Law and heads the fintech practice group of the firm. She has relevant experience in assisting clients involved in IT, new media, fintech, AI, and digital platforms on regulatory, data privacy, transactional, and corporate matters. She leads compliance projects with various regulators, including the SEC and the BSE. She also heads the firm's legal education initiatives for startups. Aside from regularly assisting Senti AI, some of the AI projects handled by Lars include advising a client that uses telco data and machine learning technology to provide credit scores, a company that uses facial recognition technology, and a tech company that provides Wi-Fi solutions and at the same time collects aggregated data for purpose of advertising and market research. She earned her Juris Doctor degree from the UP College of Law and her undergraduate degree from Ateneo de Manila University. Let's welcome Attorney Larissa Serso.
Hi guys. Hi guys.
Yeah, cool.
Hello.
All right, so let's start. This conversation, as mentioned, our primary goal here is to tackle three things revolving around AI and healthcare. So the first part will be just be discussing in the context of like research. Paano ba ginagawa yung research in health? Next, then we cover applications. So what are the healthcare applications that we can actually do or that you guys have involved with? What are the projects that you have been doing? And next part is governance. So if we're going to move this application, applied it in hospitals or applied it in the healthcare sector, what are the things that we should be discussing about? What are the steps that we need to do in order for this to make it work? So before I formally start the discussion, I think I'll be giving each of one of you like to discuss about your work and your experiences revolving around AI so that people can actually understand ano ba yung mga naging experience nyo so far. So I think let's start first with Doc Julie. If you can probably give us understanding as to your research, what it is all about, so that you can understand what is your experience on doing research on AI. Doc Julie, can you hear us? I'm checking if she can hear us. Doc Julie, we can't hear you. There's a problem on your microphone. All right, I think we'll skip first. We'll skip Doc Julie. Let's head to Doc Erwin. Doc Erwin, if you can share about and talk about what RadLens is all about, that would be fun and that would be helpful. Yeah.
To sum it up, well, basically I'm a radiologist, so I started learning about artificial intelligence a few years back. And then I always wanted to learn more, but I did not have a background in computer science. So I was seeing all these things about how AI will replace radiologists in the future. So I wanted to learn on my own what exactly is AI and how does it work, from developing the application to deploying it. So that's how I got into studying things like front-end web development. I went into HTML, CSS, JavaScript, some PHP, and finally Python. And that's how I got into TensorFlow. So when I went into TensorFlow, that's when I started doing my own little side projects. And from there, I deployed it using JavaScript to the cloud. And that's how I ended up starting RadLens. So that's my entry point into the world of AI development and design. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that, Doc Erwin. Julie, can you hear us already? Can you try if you can?
Yes, sorry, naputol ako.
Okay lang, Ma'am Julie. Maybe you can like, share a brief about what your research is all about.
So, we're just focused on skin cancer detection, specifically on Asian skin cancer, because during the Big Data for Health, they during Big Data for Health conference, they have stated, they have identified that they have generalized lesion classification trained for Caucasian skin for Asian skin. So that is where my research focuses on. So
All right. I think Ma'am Judy medyo naging choppy. We'll get back to you later. All right. I think let's move towards Doc Patrick. So can you share some of the engagement that you had with respect to health, maybe doing health information related systems, and then if you had some work towards artificial intelligence, maybe you can share it to the audience.
Yes. So maybe perhaps in this panel, I'm the most inexperienced when it comes to AI. I've only just recently started working with it, but ever since I graduated, I've heard a lot about AI, but it's all in the background. It's all background noise. And when I had my fellowship in the US, the background noise became more of a front end. So there's a lot of people around me who were researching about AI, but that wasn't the focus of my fellowship there. So when I came back here, um, I got interested in how to apply AI in various aspects of informatics in the Philippines, and it was my view that there are a lot of uses, especially where we're at right now in terms of our health systems infrastructure, and also, the human resources situation in our country. And that's why when we were presented with a problem. So the problem was that there was a lot of a high rate error rate in terms of encoding death certificates. So the solution that was presented was a computer-based training that will train even in medical school how to write death certificates, and how AI factors into that is we're trying to develop an AI that could help correct free text answers that is, for questions included in the training. So
All right.
that's our project right now.
All right, cool. Attorney Lars, maybe you can share some some of your insights, or probably some of the experience, or what are the projects that you're involved with in terms of artificial intelligence. Probably working with some of the company that was mentioned a while ago. They're dealing with all of these different types of data. I wonder what was the challenges working with different types of data in the field of artificial intelligence.
All right. So I think being surrounded by doctors and researchers, I'm probably the odd man out here in this panel. So my background is from legal, and most of my experience with AI would be closely related to our practice, which is basically we focus on technology law. So a bulk of my clients would be technology companies, and we've seen the rise of AI applications and tools in the last 2 to 3 years. Although in healthcare, I think the growth has been slower. And I think it's one factor is if you look at healthcare apps, they're not really that disruptive, meaning they can't replace the incumbents. So usually it's just a tool in aid of something else. So like big data, big data analysis, collection, and mobile health. From what we've seen is it's usually limited to those two. And the way that we work with tech companies, we're usually, as lawyers, we're usually at the opposite end of the table with contrasting ideas or with contrasting views from the engineers and from most of the tech guys. I think if there are other lawyers here, and I think Ralph, you can probably attest to this as one of our clients, kami usually yung kontrabida sa tech team. Like you, the tech guys and the business guys would want to run with an idea, run with a product. And legal would usually be there to say na, hey, you can't do this. Or so we tend to slow things down. That's one way to look at us. But I think the important contribution of lawyers in this field would be in terms of compliance. So especially in AI, compliance and ethics are very important. And you can't really have a sustainable product if you don't have these at the center of your design or your product. So most of the projects that we do would involve data privacy compliance and ensuring that a product is audited properly and complies with privacy laws in the Philippines. So I think that is my experience with AI.
All right. Okay. I think this definitely would be an exciting discussion, given that you guys have expertise or different experience. You would be seeing different lenses. So let's go ahead straight to our first topic. We just finished with the speaker introduction. Let's go head straight with the AI research for healthcare. I think this is much more relevant question to Doc Erwin and Doc Judy. If you're working on AI research, what is the usual high-level step-by-step process, or how do you prepare yourself if I'm going to create, or if I'm going to immerse myself, if I'm going to select a topic, which is on doing AI, on health-related topic, how should I prepare myself?
Me first. Okay. For step is you have to consider first your data, where you're going to get. Is it from a primary source or a secondary source? Um, if the primary source, you have to have a level of consent from patient or doctors. And for a secondary source, that means either from a certain organization, and then you have to consider also that all the information.
Ma'am Julie, nag-choppy po kayo. Right. Hello? All right, so for those who wasn't able to catch on what Dr. Julie was telling, so the first part is more on the data. Be able to get the concept of it. Yes. Yep.
To consider all that information, especially on data, it has data information. And you have to consider also the size of the data. For example, you're going to consider how small it is, how
All right, I think nawala ulit si Doc Julie. On your end, Doc Erwin, since you have been reading a lot of papers on AI, what was the common structure based on the papers that you have read as to what's the common process or procedure when people or when organizations or when academic institutions do research on artificial intelligence, besides what Prof. Julie was sharing about data, be able to get the consent, be able to also assess the size of the data. What are other things that needs to be considered?
So based on what I heard from her, I totally agree with everything she was saying, that you should focus on consent from the patient, whether it's primary or secondary source. However, I'd like to point out that most of the studies I've been reading online have been focusing on model performance. So if there's anything like a take home I'd like to share with everyone here right now, is that whenever it comes to an AI solution, you have to separate model performance from clinical outcome. I've read this a lot in some of the other journals I've read, that those two things are not the same. So let's say, for example, you have an AI model, and then I see this a lot in many of the journals. They say 97% accuracy, 85 to 86% accuracy, or sometimes they even use AUC, or area under the curve. So there's nothing wrong about that. These are great things to start from, but these all focus on model performance. After model performance, you have to focus on the actual AI solution itself, and then focus on clinical outcome. And the question there is the solution actually solving the clinical problem? So I think that's, if ever there's a take home, that's what I'm trying to impart right now. So you can build the best model ever, like a 99% accurate model or a 99% AUC. But if it doesn't solve the clinical problem, then the solution, not just the model, but the solution itself might not work. And that might be one reason why there's a big resistance towards the use of AI. At least that's how I see it. It's more of like a stage 1 and a stage 2. It's like for drugs, for drug development, stage 1 would be more like AI model performance. Is it good enough? Is it reaching that nice percentage? And the second stage would be, okay, you've built a nice model, it works well, but does it actually solve the problem? Does it actually save people's lives? Does it actually make the workflow more efficient? Does it actually make the workflow of doctors faster and easier? Or does the AI solution instead make it harder for people to work or give service to the public?
All right. Thanks for that, Doc Erwin, for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
How does what's the usual process when you're relatively assessing clinical outcomes? So you mentioned that there's two different types.
Yes,
Of,
yes.
so you have model performance, which looks into like accuracy,
Yes.
AUC,
Mm-hmm.
and then you look into the clinical outcomes. What are the typical approaches when you actually look into the context of clinical outcomes? Based on the papers that you read, what are the common approaches that some of the academic institutions or researchers have been doing to test clinical outcomes?
I saw a paper once, they were using it for pathologists, and they wanted to see if the AI solution was actually making things more efficient. Based on their studies, what they actually saw was instead of making it more efficient, it was forcing the pathologist to err towards automation bias, which is another kind of problem that you have to be wary of when creating the AI solution itself, not just the model. Because let's say the model was already at 95%. However, if the AI solution is forcing the doctor to commit automation bias, then the solution itself, not the model, but the solution is working against the grain. So that was one way of focusing on the clinical outcome. How do you minimize automation bias?
All right. Doc Judy, are you already here? Is the connection already good?
In my case, for example, for the implementation,
Okay, I think we're having a connection problem with Doc Judy. Doc Judy is still is in Calibo. It's in Ibahay,
Oh.
so probably the internet connection there is not that stable. So
I'm sorry.
Doc Judy, and maybe you can like share. Maybe you can share to the probably on the chat itself. Your some of the things that you would want to share to the group.
Yes, yes,
So
yes, yes.
it's much easier for them. And like click on the
Yes,
chat and then all the panelists and attendees so you can share your
yes, yes,
thoughts. Um,
yes.
okay, so I think in terms of AI research, we were able to just discuss one of the primary concerns there is be able to capture data. And how is it, how challenging it is in the context of the Philippines to get data? Erwin, probably you have some experiences getting data or getting your training data for your project Radlands. Where did you get those training data? Is it the training data coming from a hospital? Is it the training data that you acquired from the school from PGH, or is it the data that you just relatively captured online or get an open source data set available in Caldo?
Yeah, so basically, when it comes to getting data, it's really very hard. And for the record, I did not get any data from a hospital. I did not get it from PGH because there's a lawyer here, so I'm very wary. Yes, I did not get anything like that. Most of the data and the images I got are from open source. You have lots of data on the internet. You can download them. Like there we have Kaggle data sets. And then you can basically scrape data off the internet. You can do an image Google search for all the things you might want. The problem with that is the data isn't always homogenized. The thing is, since I'm a radiologist, I can basically curate the data myself. So looking for the data sets for the Radlands project I had, since I could span the development part as a programmer and then curate the labeled data myself, I kind of look for the images slowly. It was very hard because I had to do it myself, but I definitely did not get data from a hospital. But it's hard. Yes, it's really hard. So that's another form of resistance when developing AI here. And I think we should have better means of explaining that, because right now I think when it comes to ethical guidelines, because we have ethical boards whenever we do researches in a hospital, I think it would be better to ask our lawyer regarding that, because there's sometimes a disjoint between um, patient privacy and data ownership, because sometimes people think that patient privacy is enough, but maybe she can explain the importance of data ownership as well.
Right. What's your perspective on that, Attorney Lars, in terms of that context? Because on a research perspective,
Yeah.
we still need to get patient consent. We actually, some of the research organizations, or like in the academe, they usually go to a process to making sure that these data are well kept. So in terms of, since you're here, probably you can provide guidance as to what are the legal implications, or how do we prepare ourselves when we're actually dealing with this type of data, when we're dealing with patient data. How do we guard ourselves that, and how do we manage or prepare ourselves in handling those type of data?
All right. So on Doc Irwin's point, I guess it's useful to just lay out the regulatory landscape a bit in terms of data privacy, consent, and research. So if you look at our law, research is explicitly given as an exemption, meaning processing of personal data, which includes health data, for scientific and research purposes are taken out of the scope of the law. Meaning, if you're gonna use it you're developing a model and you won't use it for commercial purposes, then you're beyond the scope of the law. However, if you read it, if you get the information from an entity other than the data subject, so let's say you won't get it from the patient directly, you'll get it from the hospital or from an insurance company or from an employer, even if it's for research purposes, it has to satisfy two conditions. So number one, either it's public information or you obtain the consent of the data subject. So given that regulatory barrier, I would understand Dr. Irwin's point as to why it's difficult for researchers to really obtain accurate and up-to-date health data. Because even if it's exempt, you won't really, it's difficult for a researcher to get the data from the data subject or from the patient directly. Most of the time, you have to rely on another entity, in which case the data subject should have given their consent at the get-go for their personal information to be used for research. So that's the data privacy regime that we're in. And as some of you may know, our data privacy laws are a lot stricter compared to other jurisdictions. I understand in the US, under their HIPAA, the covered entities are limited to entities that are actually in healthcare. So like doctors, hospitals, etc. I think they've expanded it to include other non-healthcare entities, but only with regard to breach notification. So how other jurisdictions do it, like in the States, they go around the law by getting the data from non-healthcare units para hindi sila covered ng HIPAA. So in the Philippines, in a way, we have a better privacy regime. Since it's general, it covers all types of data regardless of the custodian. So that's a good thing in terms of privacy protection, but also difficult in terms of implementing research. So there, and then another thing, just to put it out there, the unauthorized processing of data is a criminal act in the country, which again gives more teeth to the law. Again, better for privacy, but more difficult to navigate for actors such as researchers and scientists.
All right. Okay. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's the first time I heard about if you're doing it for research, it's taken out of the scope of the law.
Yeah, but I mean, just to clarify, even if it's taken out of the scope, the researcher has to be certain that he'll only use the data for research. So if you commercialize your product, or if you use it for other things, then you'll have to comply with the law. Yeah.
In terms of because the purpose of doing research by itself is you need to publish. So there's no, if I'm going to So there will be probably some limitations there, right? That you cannot, if there's no consent, you cannot open source this model or you cannot open source this data. So you still need to have that consent because the common practice in research
Yes.
is you need to make research reproducible. Like you need to be able to reproduce that research so that anyone across the world can actually do the work itself or replicate the work and improve on the work. So in the context of research and doing research itself, so when I intend to do research and intend to open source that type of work, what would be the impact of that? Am I allowed to open source that model? Am I allowed to open source that data? Or are there limitations to that?
All right. Now for research purposes, even though it's exempt, you have to be careful that you'll only process the data necessary for the research. So, for example, if you don't have to know the names of the respondents, for example, or the data subjects from whom you've taken the data. So, in that aspect, you should be able to anonymize it and aggregate it probably before making it public. And I think it's worth noting that data privacy is just one aspect of the guidelines that you have to consider. I understand that there are a bunch of ethical guidelines issued by universities and medical industries, medical boards. So that would also have to be taken into consideration.
All right. Okay. Thanks for that information, attorney. Julie, can you already talk to us? If you're already, Doc Julie, Prof. Julie, are you here?
Hello. Uh,
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, I think we can hear you.
Okay. Most of my data are from publicly available medical images, and some of it are registered with professional organizations, especially the one that I have in South Korea. I participated with the doctors and the organizations. They gave me a, um, uh, a data by
Okay, Doc Julie went out again. I'll just message her on Messenger. All right, I think let's go ahead straight to our next topic, which is more on AI applications for health. So we talked about some of the projects a while ago by our panel. So what are the other use cases that you guys have seen where AI is applied in the context of health? Maybe you can share some projects that you were able to be involved or be part with, or projects that you have read, probably shared to you by your peers. Doc Pat, maybe you can share or shed some light on different use cases on AI.
Okay. So um, most of my knowledge about AI projects would be through osmosis by people around me. Um, so what I've learned about AI is that there's a very, not really a very niche, but there is a unique opportunity for AI when it comes to analyzing big data. And it's not just big data in a certain format. Um, I've read about this AI. I forgot the name escapes my mind right now. But what they use it for is that um, they use it in the clinics, and it looks for features in medical records, in radiologic images, in laboratory results, and uh, it takes a look at those data. So that's data in different formats, and then it makes um, a best list of differential diagnosis, and then it reports it to the physicians. And in that way, AI has a very unique advantage in analyzing data in real time. So I've heard about this AI also, the blue dot, and I don't know about the false positives of this AI, but it's the AI that um, allegedly it reported the outbreak of the coronavirus in December. So way before coronavirus became a popular thing. Um, so what the AI does is that it sifts through news reports from 65 different languages, and it also analyzes um, air traffic, as in airport ticket sales and stuff like that. And it was able to determine um, the early signs of the outbreak and where the outbreak was next going to spread after Wuhan. So allegedly, it was able to do that. And aside from another AI that apparently gave out an alert in San Francisco of a flu outbreak, and it turned out to be coronavirus. Although that latter one, I don't know the details to that. So, uh,
All
and I
right.
think okay, go ahead.
Go ahead, Doc Pat. Doc Pat, go ahead. If you would want to add more.
No. Basically, what I'm saying is, to me, one of the better uses for AI would be to analyze the data. So when I was studying the AI in high level, I determined two general uses for AI, and one of them is to do things that humans can do, but to do them more efficiently because AI doesn't get tired. And then the other is to do things that humans can't do because that thing is too complicated for an expert like a human expert to do normally. So one thing is to analyze data. Humans can do that, but there's so much data that sometimes you have to get support from an AI. And the other is, for example, the deep fake AI. So a human wouldn't be able to make Barack Obama like talk, uh, say whatever he or she wants Barack to say, but they were all able to do something like that. Like they were able to make a video of the American president giving a speech that they wrote, so something like that. So I
All
was
right.
just giving an examples to that effect.
Okay. Dr. Win, maybe you can share some other use cases besides the project that you have done. If you were able to encounter some unique use cases in which where AI is applied.
Actually, since I'm a radiologist, AI is really a hot topic in my subspec right now. So if ever there's a place where AI is being really applied, it's in my field. However, I guess if you think about where can AI be applied, I think the sky's the limit, but there should be some kind of, we should tread carefully as to how it's applied. Because if there's anything I'd like to share right now, like a take-home message about the applications of AI in healthcare, is the definition of what AI today can actually do versus what a human person can do. Because I agree totally with Dr. Patrick that there are some things that AI is really way better than the human mind, but there are still some things that the current generation of AI we have today simply cannot do. So let's focus on correlation and causality. Because when it comes to correlation, I totally agree. An AI can do the math way faster than a human. So give the AI 10 billion petabytes of data, it will correlate way faster than me. I totally agree with that. However, correlation is not causation. And the thing about healthcare is that when doctors look at data, we don't just correlate. We look for causality. And I think that's the most important part, or the discriminating feature about AI in healthcare, which is why when people keep saying that AI can replace doctors, I think AI can replace some of the work that doctors do. It's basically defined as low cognitive, repetitive um, processes. So things like that. However, when it comes to causality, you still need a doctor to look at that. So about the diagnosis, this is my personal opinion. I still believe, or I'd still rather have a doctor diagnose me than an AI, because I've been seeing it in a lot of the AI journals or forums I've been joining. A lot of people have been saying that 10 years from now, they'd rather have an AI machine diagnose them, because again, because of the reasons that an AI doesn't get tired. It will always be updated. But the whole point, the whole crux of machine learning right now is linear regression. And whatever it is, it's still basically correlation and not causation. Now, if we have to be careful about that, the difference between the power of AI in correlation and still the strength of the human mind, which is causation and correlation. Now, to answer your question about AI applications in healthcare right now, as a radiologist, instead of focusing on automated diagnosis, what I'd really like to see from AI is automatic segmentation. For example, you're looking at a bleed. I think there was a challenge recently for the RSNA, an intracranial hemorrhage challenge. They were trying to look for classifying bleeds on a CT scan. From a radiologist's point of view, what I'd like to see, hopefully, instead of diagnosing, does this have a bleed or not? I'd rather see, when I see the bleed, the AI will automatically say 35 cc. To me, that will really help my workflow, instead of saying, hey, there's the bleed or there's no bleed. Because if you're a radiologist, this is the part where I'm saying you're already going into the clinical outcome versus the model performance. In the clinical outcome, as a radiologist, you're going to look at that brain anyway. So are you going to trust the AI to do everything for you? Since I'm going to look at it anyway, I'd rather look at an application where the AI will say, or I'm going to tell the AI, hey, I see a bleed. Can you give me the actual volume? And the AI will automatically do that for me. For me, that will be one example of a truly amazing way of applying AI into healthcare, at least for my field of radiology.
Thanks for that, Dr. Wayne. Look, Pat, since you've been doing health information systems, I work with you with JITs, right? And then deploying those type of systems or health record systems in LGUs. What do you think should the characteristic of an AI system that would actually work in the context of the Philippines based on how you see on the ground people or like or health workers using medical record systems? What do you think are the effective probably or what are the characteristic of a specific AI system that would be beneficial based on how you see it on the ground on how health workers are using medical record system?
Okay, so first of all, I would like to agree with Dr. Irwin when he said that shouldn't rely on AI for causation. I would like to add to that. Um, there was a lecture before for the fellows in the USNIH wherein they outlined two problems they have with deep learning AI at the moment. Is that one is that you need a lot of data in order to train the AI. But the second one is that um, you cannot ask the AI how it came to a decision. For example, you have an AI that has a dichotomous decision to make whether there's something wrong or something not wrong with a chest X-ray, for example. And if it says no when it should be yes, you cannot ask the AI how it came up with that answer. So uh, there actually was a strange trend after that was 2 years ago, wherein people were trying to reverse engineer studies on AI to see how the deep the neural networks work. But yes, it's usually surface level how it determines decisions, and there is really no understanding, if that makes sense. When it makes a diagnosis, it's not actually analyzing the data, but basically it's using its algorithms to determine features that are present in that. Um, and so we come to this situation where in all the AI studies that I've in healthcare that I've read, um, the gold standard is always a human expert. So it's always there is this expectation that an AI cannot surpass human experts in their own fields. But to answer your question, um, by my experience, the best way for AI to be introduced into the healthcare sector is in a non-invasive manner. There will be a lot of resistance, and not just in the grassroots level, not just in the healthcare workers or the health professionals, but also um, in the government units, in officials, decision makers, policy makers. If you try to introduce an AI that's very invasive to the workflow, they're not gonna want that solution. So um, usually a proof of concept to begin with, you show how the AI works. But if you have a solution um, that works in the background, so for example, you let the doctors and the nurses and the health workers do their thing, and you have an AI that's analyzing the data that's being collected, and just presenting features that it sees, not really making decisions about it, but presenting features and patterns that it sees in the data, and then having the doctors analyze it, then it would be better, like I think in the Philippine setting. So yeah, in terms of the question, I think a non-invasive, friendly AI system would be uh, a good step, a good starting step
All right.
moving forward.
Okay. Thanks, Doc Pat. This is like a common question, not only in the context of the Philippines, but across the globe, that majority of people talk about. Do you think that AI will completely replace doctors or radiologists? What are your thoughts about that, Dr. Erwin?
Okay, actually, when I gave a lecture to the Philippine College of Radiology, that was one of the topics. There is actually a study that since the time that Henry Geoff made that statement, that bold statement that we shouldn't even be training radiologists anymore, to this very day, no radiologist has lost his job to AI. So I think that's just something that has to be put out there. But the reason, I guess, is why. Why hasn't a radiologist been replaced? It always boils down to the fact that, as I was saying earlier, and as Dr. Patrick was saying, the AI, no matter how efficient and powerful, its entire power is relegated to correlation, which is very good. I'm not going to go against that. I totally agree. It correlates really fast at lightning speed, especially now with quantum computing. But still, correlation is merely correlation. When we go towards causation, that's when the doctor has to come in, because the doctor eventually has to explain to the patient, why do you have this disease? What are we going to try to do next? These are your possible options. And the patient will have to, or let's say in my case, I'm a radiologist, I'm going to have to explain to my fellow doctor, why did I make this diagnosis based on these diseases? For example, when I was in training as a radiologist, you go through, this is how I patterned it when you're training AI. Number one, as a radiologist, my senior consultants would show me images. So and they'll ask me, Erwin, may mali ba o wala? Is there something wrong or is there nothing wrong? So that's basically image classification, right? As a person. After that, they're gonna ask me, okay, so there's something wrong. Where is the pathology? What's wrong with that? Then I have to point that out. That's object detection, another stage in AI. The last clincher, however, is, okay, Erwin, explain to me what's going on, what's wrong. And that's the part where I think, where the causation part, that's where AI has a problem when it comes to explaining why it thinks that way. Some people try to tell me now, but it produced a heat map, like it made a bounding box, and then it pointed to this part of the X-ray, and then it says that's why it's explaining the reason why it thinks there's a fracture is because it put a bounding box around that particular part of the X-ray. But that's not causation. That's just the machine being correlated and trained to put a bounding box around that area. The one who explains that it's still a fracture is the radiologist, the one who's explaining, there's a causation there. The person tripped, there was a break in the bone causing the fracture. So I think that's the main explanation there, the causation. Again, the limitation of AI, because no matter how powerful AI is right now, even if you put in quantum computing, I think they started research on reinforcement learning to try to engage causation. And there's a growing research in the realm of causation right now, but I have yet to read an actual paper in AI that specifically focuses on the causation that is available to human beings. So I think that's the limitation mainly between AI replacing doctors. However, that's the theoretical. I have a fear that AI might still replace radiologists and doctors for the wrong reason. And this is the one I'd like to explain now, which is why I went into AI, hoping to share what I know about AI, what its benefits are, and what its limitations are. Because if we're not too careful, doctors might still get replaced, but not because AI is better, but simply because AI in the future will be cheaper. I think that's the thing that we should be careful with, like you were always saying, responsible AI. Hopefully, if ever it helps us, or if it does replace me, it's because it's actually better, not because it's simply cheaper. Okay, that's it.
Thanks for that, Doc Erwin. What's your perspective on that, Doc Pat? There's a lot of newspaper talking about or arguing, revolving around AI replacing doctors or radiologists. What are your thoughts on that?
Uh, right now, with the environment we are presented currently, I do not think that doctors or radiologists will be replaced anytime soon. Um, Dr. Irwin explained it perfectly that the AI cannot really understand. Um, there's still the experience and the training that um, the doctors and radiologists were given, that the AI that can never really be given to the AI, because you're giving the AI a lot of data, but it really doesn't understand that data. So there's still an error rate there that is expected, because there's really no analysis involved. I mean, you call it analysis, but the cognition that is present when humans do it is not there when it comes to AI. What I see the AI would be doing would be making things basically faster. So if there's the bulk of the work, um, if there's a big job to be done in a certain big corpus of data, then the AI can help humans in order to sort that data. Actually, the blue dot data that I was talking about earlier, the one that allegedly detected the coronavirus outbreak in December before most other people noticed it. Um, it it needed human analysis. It needed a human to analyze the data that it was sorting. So basically its role would be to sort the news reports, and then classify them. So, for example, they gave an example in the article that I read that it will sort out anthrax, for example. It will warn them that, oh, there's a rising trend in the mention of anthrax in the news reports or in posts and stuff like that. And I think it's anthrax the disease and not the rock band or something like that. I think there's a rock band called Anthrax, but yeah. So it's still, and then the human still needs to sift through that report in order to declare that, oh, this is probably a pending outbreak and we should warn people about it. So the AI there was making some decisions, but only on the surface level. So when it came to the epidemiology, it still required human analysis in order to give it meaning, basically. Um, and uh, Same is true with the projects I've heard in radiology. So, for example, there is a project in Africa wherein there is no radiologist. So what they're doing, no, there's one radiologist, but uh, that radiologist is catering to several towns that are very far apart. So that radiologist can be in all places at once. So what they do is they trained an AI in order to detect uh, pathologies in a chest X-ray. So what they did was the X-ray was in a truck in a container truck, and then people would go into the truck, have their X-ray taken, and then there's a laptop there with the AI, and it tries to determine if there's something wrong with the X-ray or not. But even even with that, it still passes through the radiologist for confirmation. It just makes the process faster. The radiologist just has to review the findings of the AI. But then, you know, if like the image is like there's a lot of artifacts in the image, or there's a lot of noise in the image, like there will be a higher error rate, um, because that's not how the AI was trained. Versus if a radiologist read those plates, then the radiologist would be immediately able to assess that, okay, there's just noise here, or this is just an artifact. But the AI would have, especially if the AI did not receive a lot of data when it comes to artifacts, it would not be able to easily identify artifacts and stuff like that. So definitely, no, I don't think that it will replace anybody any soon.
All right, all right. Thanks for that knowledge. I think from the discussion, what I'm actually getting is this is where experts or radiologists and doctors side by side work together with programmers or AI engineers to build a holistic solution. It doesn't necessarily mean that we actually remove AI out of the picture, as we can see, as discussed by Dr. Irwin and Doc Pat. Processing a huge chunk of data to be able to pinpoint or do segmentation or do classification. And then once all of these tasks have been done by the AI models, and then it would be reviewed by a radiologist and doctor so that they can provide diagnosis. So we're seeing on the healthcare perspective, an augmented space in which AI and doctors and radiologists work side by side, be able to process huge amount of data. I think that's a nice use case that you provided in Africa, Doc Patrick, because it somehow emanates our use cases here in the Philippines, right? So we have fewer doctors here, and then you have patients in the barrios or like in the far-flung areas. So we probably leveraging the capabilities of artificial intelligence, we might be able to serve those areas. So I think we're seeing not totally replacing, but it's more on augmenting and helping one another with respective tasks, because we highlighted that the causation part is handled by the radiologists or doctors, and the correlation be able to do the math faster and process data faster is being done by the AI models itself. So let's move to the next topic, which talks about AI governance. So we're dealing a lot of patient data. How do we balance protection and use for scientific research? I think you give a thought on this, Attorney Lars, on research. But how do we make sure that we were able to get that type of protection with data? Are there any anonymization procedures that we need to do? What are the common, or like based on your experience, what are the common process that they do to anonymize data? Attorney, I think you're currently on mute.
There. Okay. I think before we dive into the nitty-gritty on how to effectively anonymize or secure data, I'd want to give a brief discussion on, I think, the main reason why there's a seeming tension between data protection and AI or scientific research / innovation. So I think the conversation that's been going on between, like, in the field of AI and data protection is it's as if there's a dichotomy between data protection and data liquidity, especially in AI. Because as we all know, AI models can only be improved if we have lots and lots of data. So if there's data liquidity. However, if you talk about healthcare, it's important for health data to be interoperable, like among different institutions and entities. And health data is also crucial for medical and population health research, which is for the public good. So I think we have to emphasize that we can both have research and innovation and data protection. So the way to look at it from a non-legal perspective is we have to remember that data protection is contextual, and the level of protection that like a data set should be accorded to should be calibrated against the data type involved, the intended use, and the possible commercial use and ambitions of the data custodian. So, for example, if the organization will only collect the data for research and to, for example, predict life expectancy or predisposition to disease, likelihood of readmission, etc., then of course we give a lighter data protection mechanism. However, if the health data will be used for other things, like for example, for commercial use, you give it to an insurance company or you give it to an advertising company, and some other non-health related sector will make money out of it, then definitely we have to give a stronger level of protection over that data. In terms of, sorry, your question was about how do we ensure protection. I think we should remember that we should put the accountability on the entity doing the collection. So if it's the hospital or some other health institution, it should be noted that accountability over whatever happens to the data shared by patients would be on the hospital. So for example, if the hospital employs a subcontractor to implement an AI solution or employs a tech company to avail of their solution, at the end of the day, the actions done by the subcontractor or the AI company should be on the hospital pa rin. So even if they subcontract, etc., that's their solution. The data subject only has a relationship with the hospital. It doesn't have the data subject doesn't have a relationship with the tech company or the subcontractor. So if, for example, there's a data leak or some other issue, the data subject should be able to go to the hospital and tell the hospital, like, hey, what are you doing with my data? I want you to stop sharing it. Or in some instances, I want you to transfer my data to this other entity. And the hospital should be able to comply with that request. Yun. And then in terms, like generally speaking naman, in terms of how do we protect data, I think we should just keep in mind the main principles of data privacy, which is number one, transparency, number two, proportionality, and number three, legitimate purpose. So as custodians of data, we should always make it a point to be transparent to the data subject as to how we handle the data. So this might be difficult for AI since, as both doctors mentioned earlier, most of the AI tools out there operate in terms of like black boxes. We don't really know what happens to the data or how like the neural networks process the data and come up with outputs. But I think if you implement it at the get-go and make it a point that by design you should have an AI that's explainable, then we should be on the right track. And I think there's a demand for explainable AI now that it's going into really sensitive industries such as health. So in legal, I think there's a strong demand for explainable AI precisely for courts and for judges to be able to appropriate blame. So if something goes wrong, we should know who to blame. And if AI is involved, then the provider of the AI should be able to explain how a result was achieved, etc. So that's transparency. And then for purpose, it should be clear to the data subject why his data is being processed. So if it's for research, he should know very clearly that it's for research. And I don't think it's fair that we just bury this in unreadable terms of use or privacy policies. So we should strive for these pieces of information to be easily readable. And then number three, proportionality. Well, it just means that we should only collect data that's necessary for our purpose. So if you're building a machine, for example, that only does like image detection, then you only collect the images. You don't really have to collect the names, etc. So just collect what you need. So transparency, legitimate purpose, and proportionality.
All right. There's some like discussion also with respect to data privacy in terms of crisis. So with respect to crisis such as COVID, what's happening now, which is a pandemic in which data is relatively an important factor, or it plays a crucial role to deeply understand situation and deeply understand what's happening. Should we deprioritize privacy rights?
Okay, all right. So I've been reading a bunch of social media posts about this in the last 2 to 3 weeks. So if you read through Facebook, which is a headache, there's been calls from several sectors for data privacy to be loosened up. And I get where it's coming from, but during a crisis like this, I think it's crucial for technology to still be respectful of privacy. And the regulator, which in this case is the National Privacy Commission, has released a statement, I think last week. I think it was triggered by the statement from IBP and College of Surgeons. So it was triggered by that. And then the NPC came out with a press release stating that they are not in favor of essentially loosening the privacy regime. And their argument, which I think is reasonable, is because there are existing laws and regulations which already mandate patients and certain healthcare entities to be transparent with data. So I think that's RA 1133-2. And so that's the legal regime. And from a practical standpoint also, or from a policy standpoint, it's really difficult for government or for us as a society to suddenly waive our privacy rights during a pandemic. Because once government steps in and claims that we've made a blanket waiver over a privacy right, it's quite difficult to roll back on those measures. And I think it's more than ever, it's important during times like these to build trust among your population. because I mean, once you become too invasive, there might be some pushback from the general population or from patients, and they might start not to cooperate instead of cooperating. So you don't want that dynamic, or you don't want to reach that level of dynamic where instead of cooperating, uh, possible patients or suspected patients will instead not share information. So that's why we still we have to have rules in place, and especially guidelines on privacy, even if it's a crisis.
Thanks for that, attorney. Another question is like there's a lot of software providers now that process data in the cloud, and with regards to implication, I think some industries they are so strict about it. Where do you? I think government is strict about in terms of where do you process your data. It should be within the compounds of the country itself. Is it the same in the context of like health? Are there any discussions on that? Are there any already laws or any guidelines on where data should be processed? I think in the context of Singapore, sila nga, very strict sila with their data that you cannot get out any data na kinolect within Singapore and parang ilabas outside Singapore. So in the context of the Philippines, are we strict with that? Are there any laws imposed, or are there any plans to put some guidelines or restrictions with revolving around it as to where to process, for example, a patient data?
All right. So very briefly, currently, the general rule is there's no prohibition against any data processor using cloud technology. So I think except for banking services, we have no data localization rules, meaning we can house our data in offshore locations and use cloud. However, this has to be read in light of the Data Privacy Act. So just a brief overview. So under the Data Privacy Act, processing, all types of processing is covered, and storage and how you arrange your data set is included in the term processing. And you have to inform your data subjects about all the types of processing that you do. So if you store your information in the cloud, you just have to tell the data subjects that you do that. And aside from that, there are no other prohibitions. Oh, well, of course, you have to make sure that your cloud service provider implements a certain level of technical and organizational security measures that are in line with our own standards. But it's nothing too difficult. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for that. Another one challenge question in the context of AI governance is, I think Doc Pat, Doc Erwin can also share and feedback as to which organizations, in the usual process, right, when you create medicines, dumadaan yan sa approval process before it gets launched, diba? Before it gets used by the public. In terms of artificial intelligence, do we have something like that? Should we put some guidelines as to how AI systems should be deployed? What are your perspectives on that? Let's start with Dr. Erwin.
Yeah, so for the Philippine College of Radiology, we have an AI subcommittee. So we have radiologists, and we discuss how AI might actually affect the practice of radiology. And we try to, when the PCR board has questions regarding AI, it usually courses through us, and then we give them our interpretations or our suggestions on how the AI might affect the workflow of radiology. So in terms of like a body, it's not really a governing body, it's more of like a subcommittee where the main governing body for the PCR has a means of asking others about how it might affect radiology in general. So there is a sort of body for the PCR. Now, if you're asking if we should have a larger body for AI, I think that would really help, because AI isn't just for radiology. As Dr. Patrick was discussing earlier, AI is broad. It also affects not just imaging data, but written data. When he was talking about the reading charts and clinical and charts for patients, that would fall under NLP. So that's not computer vision anymore. So I think it would be really nice if we did have some kind of larger scale body, not just for radiology, but for AI in healthcare in general. That would be an interesting thing to have.
Doc Pat, what are your perspective on that?
So first of all, in the Q&A section, I think Dr. Julie answered the question about if there is an initiative to evaluate AI in healthcare projects. So she says that there's already an organization governing this, but which organization is that? I'm not sure. So right now, I am not aware
Yeah, maybe.
Of a national organization that does this. But if I were to comment on it, I think at the very least we should have a registry of AI that is being used in healthcare, so that there's transparency in who is who or what is processing our data, especially if when it comes to something going wrong and um, the finger pointing starts. At least we know where to look. Um, uh, and as to the uh, which organization should it be? I think it depends uh, on the AI itself. There's a case to be made for a case-to-case basis on evaluating an AI project. But if we do need one governing body, I would say it in the context of the Universal Healthcare Law. DOH is in charge of population health, so there should be a DOH person there. PhilHealth is in charge of individual health services, so I think PhilHealth should have a person there, and then I think the organization should have people in the technology sector, especially in the government. So someone from uh, Department of Information and Communication Technology, I guess, or someone from the OST, and then a bunch of subject matter experts. So, for example, if it is a radiology AI project, someone from radiology should be there so that they can evaluate the impact of the solution in their own field.
Correct. Another question is more towards accountability. So there's a lot of talk about accountability as to what would happen. For example, the prediction is wrong. I think Attorney Lars was able to cover um, accountability of the data processor itself. Can you probably dig down deeper on how we foresee accountability? Is it only by the hospital? What's the accountability of the data owners? What's the accountability of data processors? What's the accountability, for example, of the doctors doing the diagnosing or using the tool itself? How should we tie those different types of actors in the picture itself?
Okay. I think as a matter of best practice, it's important for anyone or any entity that wants to implement an AI solution to do a privacy impact assessment. So that's what we call it, but essentially it entails that the entity do a mapping of all the processing activities that will be done by the solution and how it's going to be implemented on the ground, like by the doctors and then by the tech team in the background. And so essentially it entails you to follow the data flow. And once we do that, then it'll be clearer to the entity, the owner of the solution. It'll be clear as to like where possible issues may arise. So, for example, if if the solution owner engaged the services of a subcontractor to develop the tech, then there should be an agreement. So this is such a lawyer perspective, but there should be an agreement between the data owner slash the hospital and the subcontractor as to how the subcontractor can handle the data. So if the hospital only wants the subcontractor to develop the model and to not use the data anymore, then that should be clear in their agreement. So essentially, you put parameters as to how the data will be used, and there should be disincentives for bad actors to process the data in a way that's unauthorized. And provided that you have these contracts in place, that will already give you some leverage to go after any bad actor legally, and also to protect yourself from possible lawsuit from your data subjects. So, I think accountability would require the process owner to really do a nitty-gritty mapping of the processing activities. And just to be clear, accountability may be determined independent of ownership. So for example, if the solution is only licensed to the hospital, that doesn't mean that the hospital is no longer accountable. In terms of control, the hospital would have control over that data naman eh. And then the subcontractor will only be following the instructions of the hospitals. So yon, I think sa akin, my suggestion ko would be to do a thorough mapping of the processing activities. And the AI provider should be clear and transparent as to how the AI solution really works.
Right. I think as what I heard, probably this would be a thorough practice if we're going to do any AI deployment in the context of like health. But
Yes.
are we foreseeing in the future that this will be standardized in the sense that there will be a framework that if we're going to do this, ito na yung magiging process, ito na yung magiging accountability? Are we seeing that type of like happening in the month or happening in the next future?
I think it's been happening primarily because people are scared of the Data Privacy Act. So ever since the rules got issued 2 years ago, companies have been very stringent on making sure that the solutions that they apply are compliant with the law. And for them to determine whether it's compliant with the law, it really requires an audit of the system. So yeah, I think it's a matter of best practice, but also to comply with current regulations. That should be something that the AI community should really look into. And I think this is a good venue for us, for researchers and engineers to really push for that practice.
All right. So we've been talking a lot of things regarding challenges, things that we need to consider when we talk about artificial intelligence, when we do projects or publish application or produce applications in healthcare. What are your wish lists? What do you see? What ano yung gusto niyo makita in the next probably coming months, the next few years, on how the Philippines is embracing AI in the context of like healthcare? Probably let's start with Dr. Lu.
Well, for me, I think it's more of collaboration. Instead of AI and doctors going against each other, there should be a better standard of how AI developers can work together with doctors and radiologists. Because right now, when I go on AI forums, it sometimes turns into the no AI will always be better than doctors, or no doctors will always be better than AI, which is kind of sad when there's a lot of potential for artificial intelligence, so long as we curb the expectations to what is reality and not fall for the hype. Because that's the problem, I think. There's too much hype out there that's distorting what AI can actually give us, and that affects the acceptance of AI. Instead, it would be nice if we could focus on collaboration between the AI developers and what the doctors actually need. Because sometimes I see these things like there's a lot of AI software products being produced right now. So you're building a solution and then you're looking for a problem that your solution can solve. Why not flip that and look at the problem itself and build an AI solution for that particular problem? Because I think that will really help healthcare. and that can only happen if there's genuine collaboration between AI developers and doctors. So
All right.
that's my wish list.
Okay. Doc Pat, what's your wish list?
Uh, my wish list, especially in the near future, is that our healthcare information system technology infrastructure um, becomes homogenized throughout the country. We have a lot of medical records and data information that are not being used and we cannot use because they're hidden away, stashed away in folders somewhere or in storage rooms. Um, that's a lot of data that we can be using. We can use AI to analyze, to look for patterns in that data and then report to us. Uh, um, and I think it's kind of a waste that we're gathering all this data, but um, we don't have uh, a shared health record. So one, the health information technology infrastructure, I wanted to improve and level, like patag, as in same level throughout the country. Um, and two, matuloy na yung health information exchange. I don't know what's the progress on that, but I hope we have at least regional health information exchange where health facilities are contributing to a secure, de-identified, anonymized, shared health record, so that we can make use of data meaningfully. Because we have a lot of patients, we have a lot of uh, people, Filipinos, who are, uh, basically allowing us to have their data. Um, but a lot of that data is lost in the ether because we can't use it.
Attorney Lars, what's your wish list?
Wish list, in addition to the wish lists of the two doctors, I would want a more proactive initiative from government, and maybe industry participants can help that push to come up with not necessarily regulations, but at least guidelines and best practices when it comes to how AI should be implemented uh, in certain industries. So I think the DTI is coming out with a draft guidelines soon, but that's more for consumer protection vis-a-vis AI. But I think that's a good step because you really don't want to uh, you don't want to if you're a regulator, you wouldn't want to come out with hard and fast regulations and laws on something that's so new and innovative such as AI. So guidelines and best practices suggestions would be a good step. And then once those are in place, we can see how the technology moves, and then we can fashion better guidelines as we get more educated about the technology.
All right. Thanks for that. Okay. So we're opening the Q&A from our audience. So you can see there the Q&A on your Zoom, and then you can type any questions that you would like type, and then we'll be answering some of those. One mentioned about, speaking of regulation, would regulatory sandboxes help? Attorney Lars?
Definitely. So I know we have a regulatory sandbox for fintech solutions. So one for AI would definitely help. So hopefully one of the regulators step up and decide to be active in the space. And just to add, I think that's really important kasi ngayon yung conversation about regulations in terms of AI is limited to data privacy. And I think that's really just one layer of it. We have to tackle like ethical issues, etc. And a sandbox would allow the regulators and the market players to identify what the issues are.
Right. Okay. Another question, probably that question that I miss is, usually when you create AI models, like produce ng model, so you have data is owned probably by the hospitals, but on your own context, who should own the model? Attorney Nurse. Who should own it? Should it be owned by the developer who developed the machine learning model, or it should be owned by the one who actually told you to build this model for me? So, sino yung nag-take ownership supposedly dapat ng model?
Well, it depends on who my client is. Yeah, but kidding aside, I think there are a bunch of considerations. So number one, you can look at it as a commercial issue, right? So for example, if you're the client, you want an AI solution, and then you start pouring in a lot of money, a lot of resources into it. If it's just really one-time use, let's say a chatbot, it's probably not a big deal for you if you don't own the model. You're fine with it just being a SaaS arrangement. You just have the authority to access that solution on the web. Then you're probably fine with not owning it. But for example, if your need for AI is complex or comprehensive and you want to build stacks and stacks of tools on top of one another, it may make sense for you to fight for ownership. And of course, kasi once you start talking about ownership, tataas yung presyo, maraming consideration. So, I wouldn't want to give like a one-time answer. So it really depends on what you want.
Okay. What's your perspective on this, Doc Erwin? As to who do you think should be the owner of model? Do you agree with the Attorney Nars that it's a conversation between the data owners and the data processors? What's your thought on that?
I think I agree that it depends, so long as there's transparency, that you're talking to the patient or the person where you got the data from, or you got the hospital to give you the data, then you have to really put it out there in the contract when the model is created, who will own this model. Because along with the ownership of the model, I think, comes accountability. I think that's the most important thing. People are talking about, yeah, the model belongs to me. Sige, it belongs to you, but are you ready to be accountable for this model? For example, in healthcare, people keep saying, hey, I have a model, it's 97% for healthcare, great. Okay, so you put it in someone's hospital. I think we didn't discuss this, the problem with covariate shift and how AI models are extremely susceptible to covariate shift. So my question there, okay, the model is yours. You apply it to my hospital A or my hospital B. So since it belongs to you, isn't it your responsibility to retrain that model so that it can be performant in my hospital? So that's the thing. Responsibility and ownership, I think, should be connected. So if you really want to own the model, then you should be prepared to say that you're also responsible for the model. So these things have to be clearly stated in the contract whenever two people or a group of people are discussing the development of AI.
All right. So another question from the audience is, are there any successful deployed AI to healthcare? I think in the context of the Philippines that you have seen being used? Doc Erwin?
Okay, I think this is a tricky question because when you say successful, you're going to have to define the word success.
Okay.
So if you're going to define success, success means an AI business vendor made lots of money by selling that AI, that's successful. Now, another thing is, as I said, clinical outcome. Okay, this vendor sold it for a lot of money, but is it actually helping the workflow? That's something you're going to have to ask the doctors. And sometimes when these things happen, who actually asks the doctors if it actually helps them? Because sometimes right now when a new technology is given to a doctor, let's move AI out of the picture. Let's say it's an EMR or an electronic medical record system. Sometimes we take it upon ourselves to adjust. Yung doktor yung nag-a-adjust dun sa solution. So that's what I was talking about. When you create an AI solution, it's not just the model you should be focusing on, which is 95% or 99%. You should actually focus on the AI solution and not just the model. Is it actually making it easier for the doctor to deliver healthcare? Because in my definition, that is success. Not simply being able to deploy an AI solution to a hospital and then you claim to the world, hey, my AI solution is being used in hospitals A through Z. the real question is, okay, it was deployed in that hospital. Have you asked any of the doctors? Did it actually make life easier? So it really boils down to the word success, and the definition of success will really depend on who you ask.
Right. Okay.
So I guess that's my...
I totally agree on that. So it's more of the answer of this question is defining what is success.
Yes.
It's more of you probably consulting with a doctor or consulting with the hospital as to what their measurement of success are before we can actually answer this question. All right. Okay. So um, another question from our audience is, why isn't it possible to make certain data collection regulation relax in emergency situations? Like it's weighing data privacy with survivability and economic sustainability. Like it's even possible to make data collection be an opt-in option where the subjects can decide where to get in and get out of data collection in the context of the Philippines. I think, Attorney Lars.
Yep. Okay. Again, I think yung premise kasi is there's an inconsistency between liberty and security. And what we're saying is there's none. You don't have to choose one or the other. It's not an all or nothing approach. So in the case of like a pandemic, of course, extensive government power may need to be leveraged in some way that trumps over individual rights. But we don't give up or give a blanket waiver over our privacy rights. If the government needs to do, for example, contact tracing, okay, they can do that, but it doesn't have to reach the level that you broadcast the name of the suspected patient. You can disclose the address, where he's been, like how Singapore does it. But even in Singapore, a country that's very strict in terms of regulation, they've seen a lot of cases of harassment and discrimination over against suspected patients. And that's what we want to guard against. Alam mo yun, parang the whole conversation about we're still a country of rules, not of, like, it's not going to be chaotic. So there. So that's my point kanina when I said that we're not going to give up our privacy rights. Yeah. And then again, just to add, no, the level of like loosening of the regulation should be supported, of course, by science. So if science supports the need for certain measures, then fine, but it should be contained and must be time bound. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Another question. Hi, Director Sen, from DTI is listening. Would you know any countries that have specific laws and regulation governing their data going cross-border, in this instance, health information? It said that eventually countries will be trading not anymore goods and services, but trading in data. I think, Attorney, you can probably...
The question is, what countries have regulations about cross-border transfer of data, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we have that. That's the Data Privacy Act. There's a specific provision there stating that the law will have application offshore if what's involved are data pertaining to Filipinos or Filipino residents. So given that we have that in place, it just says that all processors of data must be explicit as to whether it transfers data offshore, etc. So we already have that. And then GDPR in the European Union, it acts the same way. It also regulates cross-border transfer of information. And if I remember correctly, under the GDPR, which is the privacy regulation for the European Union, they are not allowed to transfer data in countries that do not have the same level of protection as them. So tayo, because of the DPA, you've complied with that standard since it's stricter. But the European Union comes out with a list of countries that you can transfer them. And for some reason, we're still not there. So there are a bunch of countries. The US, I think, they're very loose about data privacy. They have nothing in place. California has one, but it's looser than what we have.
Right. So a follow-up question in that is, it is said that eventually countries will be trading not anymore goods and services, but trading in data. Do you see that our health data would be traded, or do you think that we need to keep that data on our borders? What's your opinion on that?
Personal opinion, Okay. I really don't have strong feelings about data localization because for innovation and for digital platforms to really work and for AI solutions to work, you'll need a bunch of data. And as mentioned a while back, I think it was touched upon, one of the limitations of AI really is data bias. And the only way that you can cure that really is to get a bunch of data, have source of data that's different from what you have. Uh, so yeah, so I think like right now that's being done by the giant e-commerce platforms. They have operations in different countries in Southeast Asia, for example, and they're processing that huge chunk of data that they have to come up with better solutions. So I'm in favor of that. But as mentioned a while ago, it should always consider privacy rights at the end of the day and make sure that data subjects have autonomy over their data and they can determine whether or not they want to share their data. And in the first place, they should know that their data is there because most of the time, some unscrupulous tech companies, they just keep on collecting data and we don't know who has it. So, yeah.
Right. What's your thought on that, Doc Orwin, in terms of how data being traded outside the Philippines?
Well, that's a real danger right now because if you think about it, we're under the COVID crisis, and there's always, as attorney was saying, there's that temptation to loosen the rules and regulations around data privacy. So it's a very difficult question to answer, but I still agree that there should always be a certain level of rules and regulations to make sure that we're not, okay, I'll say it, data mined. Because I think that's the whole thing. If ever data is saved elsewhere on another server in another country, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with having data shared because we all do it. We don't know where our images are stored anymore when you put them in iCloud or in Google Photos, so that's okay. The most important thing, however, is that you're sure that whatever data is being shared in the cloud, it's not being data mined for someone else's purposes. So someone's making a lot of money from that and you're not aware of that. I think like Attorney was saying, so long as the person is aware. Because what's sad is if the person is not aware and a large company is data mining their data through someone else, I think that's where we're going to have a problem. So long as everyone is aware, I mean, if you are aware and you agree, I'm aware, I agree, attorney is aware, she agrees, then there's nothing wrong with that. It's just being data mined without you even knowing.
All right. Doc Pat, what are your thoughts on that?
Uh, when it comes to the point of, they said that eventually we will not be trading in goods and services and we'll be trading in data. I think we're already there, in some way or another. We keep hearing about these news that, Facebook is selling the data to someone, and that's why we're getting so many targeted ads and political stuff and all that. I think we're already there. And I agree with all of the answers here that it, it will all boil down to consent. So it's my data. I at least should know uh, how it is being used and who is using it. So the problem there is, um, the people didn't know that their data was being used for political purposes, and so like they're getting targeted ads, political ads, and stuff like that. And Facebook is categorizing people, and they're getting filtered information and stuff like that. And I think that's where the line was being crossed there. And in terms of uh, in times of crisis, I also agree with all the answers been that has been given. That um, there's also a precedent that we're setting, um, when it comes to how we act in amidst a crisis. And while it is very tempting, ideally, that um, you know we have all the data, so like we can analyze fully how a disease is spreading, like what age groups are vulnerable, what demographics are vulnerable. We should be cognizant of the fact that there are opportunists who want to use that kind of data, and I think that there should be security protocols in place at the very least. And again, there should be consent. Over.
All right. Thank you, Doc Pat. Another follow-up question here is, in terms of AI in the context of the Philippines, do we see data localization being the norm? Doc Erwin.
Sorry, the question is, will data localization be the norm?
Yes. Be or should be the norm if we're going to apply or do AI in the context of the Philippines. Because I think the main premise of this is some of the work artificial intelligence models are built using open source data set that are trained with different, for example, chest X-rays of Americans or Japanese or Korean. If we're going
Oh,
to do that if we're going to use those models in the Philippines, do we need to localize?
So this is different from the other question about whether or not data in the Philippines should stay in the Philippines. This is different. This is asking whether models should be applied to the Philippines. Okay, I totally agree with that because that's a really big issue now. I see it a lot, especially in radiology. There are a lot of vendors selling their really high-end cutting-edge models, giving AUCs of 90% and above, or accuracies well above that, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But as I said, we have to realize that AI ML models are very susceptible to covariate shift. I have to repeat that. AI ML models are very susceptible to covariate shift, and when they break, sometimes they break silently. I think there's an actual article there. I can share that later if ever you want. But the problem is, since we can't really trace these AIs because they don't really give you causality, it's just correlation. How do you know when the AI is no longer performant against the current population? So let's say an AI model was trained in a different set of okay, let's go straight to COVID-19. We're always talking about that, especially in radiology. Right now, what they're looking for is the findings in radiology would be ground glass opacities on chest CT scan. You have ground glass opacities that are peripherally distributed, found in the lower bases of the lungs. Okay, that's fine. You usually do not find lymphadenopathy. You usually do not find cavitation. These are the things that we are taught. However, in the Philippines, we have to remember in our population, we have tuberculosis. So is it impossible for a person to have tuberculosis to also have COVID-19? So these findings might actually appear in the chest CT scan. So this is the importance of localizing the model to the actual population. So it's very important. If the question is, should we localize the models to the Philippines? Absolutely, I totally agree with that.
All right. I think Doc Julie can still provide answers on the localization because she's been doing work on that. I browsed the paper that she worked on when she created a model for melanoma for the melanoma detection. So I think Dr. Julie can help us answer, shed light as to the localization. Another question here that was answered already is: are there any initiatives to prepare higher education institutes and their research ethics board to evaluate AI in healthcare projects? Is there training for this? Is there a guidance document that they can refer to? As answered by Prof. Julie, there is an organization already that is governing this, and they conduct seminar meeting every year. And she was able to attend one last year at DLSU. It's the National Ethics Commission, chaired by Doc Pilipinas Natividad, and there is a subcommittee on the Philippine Health Research Ethics Board. So I think it is more on the health ethics research. So there is a discussion, already a starting discussion revolving around artificial intelligence for healthcare. Yeah. All right. So I think we were able to tackle and discuss a lot. And definitely I was able to learn a lot from all the answers and all of the knowledge that you guys shared. So we just to have a quick recap. So we covered discussing AI and research. I think Doc Julie was able to answer some of the important question there. That if we're going to do health research, very very important is to identify where your data sources is. So where is it coming from? Is it a secondary source or a primary source? And be able to get the consent. Number of images is relevant. So you should be able to detect or be able to understand what the size of your data. Will you be considering augmentation? And you need to also consider what are the type of devices when you capture these images. What are the specifications? Are they taken indoor, outdoor? And what are the types of filters? These are some of the challenges in the context of on the computer science perspective. There's different variations of devices that you do when you perform X-ray or CT scan. How do you adjust those? How do you adjust those data? And then very important that you need to consider a domain expert, okay? When you're actually working with AI research. So, and be able to tie up with professional organizations because you need to also get their consent. You need to also review, is this conforming to the ethics? That's why there's a lot of discussions about ethics because when you do health research, you're not just only doing it for fun. You're doing it, you're doing something that needs to be reviewed, that needs to be thoroughly reviewed by a set of panel, by a set of experts. And it is important that you read the current literatures. So you just don't go through like what's the current GitLab project there. You need to go to the actual main resource of that GitLab project or GitHub project. You read the paper, you read the actual paper, and you constantly keep yourself updated as to what are the new strategies. I think as pointed by Doc Erwin a while ago, model performance, and then you now have clinical outcomes papers that are already being published. So when you're looking into the context of doing AI research, you should be able to look into those step-by-step guidelines. Attorney Lars was able also to mention that in terms of like research, you should be able to still guard your process, be able to still comply with the data privacy as to how you actually get your data. With respect to the context of AI in application, there's a lot of applications we use where AI is actually applicable. We've seen opportunities where AI is beneficial when we're analyzing big data. This is where you're going to see analyze a huge chunk of data for radiology images and be able to assess emerging patterns from huge chunk of data. But we also like seen that we try to work together side by side with doctors, not meant to replace them, but we build solutions or we build artificial intelligence models to support the work of the expert itself. This is where Doc Erwin and Doc Pat was able to highlight the correlation and then the causality in which the diagnosis is still needs to be done by an expert, but the process, for example, identifying the images and be able to detect some part of the images can be done by the AI itself, and then the diagnosis will be handled by the doctor. So we're seeing an emerging side by side workflow in which artificial intelligence work together with doctors and radiologists. We see also, I think Doc Pat was able to share one use cases in Africa. One use case in Africa that there's one radiologist in one specific city and be able to analyze all of those patient data is tedious, and they were able to capitalize on the use of artificial intelligence to capture and analyze data, and the radiologist is still the one doing the diagnosis itself. And then we moved into covering, discussing about AI governance, and in which that we covered about data protection, be able to contextualize data, calibrate how it's going to be used, and we were able to discuss, and Attorney Lars was able to discuss that in the context of them being a custodians of data, we should be able to make data, or we should be able to make AI projects transparent, explainable. That's why there's a lot of work in terms of AI explainable research. There's a lot of work in that space right now, and proportionality. So there's a lot of things that we need to consider in the context of governance of data, discussing accountability, who should be accountable. So all of those step-by-step guidelines should be thoroughly reviewed. The Attorney Las was able to share that there's a privacy impact assessment that should help us, should help developers, or should help companies provide a guidelines as to who would be accountable, who would be using the data, for what purpose the data would be used, what data should be used, and how it will be processed. So all of those nitty-gritty guidelines of process, in order to make sure that parties, the data owners, the patients, the data processors are guarded in a sense. For our wish list, we see a lot of opportunities for collaboration. So I think that's also one of my wish lists, that we promote collaboration instead of arguing AI devs versus doctors and radiologists. So that's why we build this community to promote collaboration. So I hope this will be the start of continuous conversation with AI developers and AI engineers, AI researchers, and doctors, and be able to also homogenize data. So as shared by Doc Pat, there's a lot of data out there in the Philippines, but it's not relatively being used. So hopefully, we were able to standardize that data. That's a huge data that we can actually use for research and for the purposes of improving the healthcare ecosystem of the country itself. And I think Attorney Lars was able to share that the government should also take part proactively into building guidelines and best practices of doing this type of projects in the context of like healthcare in the Philippines itself. So I think we were able to learn a lot tonight, discussing different various aspects, and for me myself, I was able to learn. I was able to learn from all of these amazing speakers who have been doing a lot of work and have been doing a lot of review of literatures, doing work on artificial intelligence by themselves. Um, and this has been a learning experience, probably not only for me, but for hopefully for everyone who listened to our webinar tonight. So um, thank you so much for your time, and I wish that we continue this conversation. I think we highlighted some of the key actions that we need to do now as a community, and take this forward, so that we can be able to like help build more use cases on how AI can actually help the country itself. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much again for our panel for spending the 2 hours with us tonight and sharing their expertise and their opinions on how we can improve the use of how we can use AI in the context of our healthcare sector in the Philippines. So I hope everyone learned a lot. We will be uploading this webinar also on YouTube so that you can share it with your friends. So the more that we can share and we can inform, and a lot of people revolving around this discussion would be beneficial also for our country. So yeah, thank you, Attorney. Thank you, Doc Erwin. Thank you, Doc Pat, and thank you, Mom Judy, for all of the knowledge that you impart to us.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone. Bye bye.